Hello, you're listening to the Frugal Crafter podcast. I'm Lindsay Weirich, and today I have a very special guest, the remarkable James Gurney. He is the creator of the illustrated Dinotopia book series and a prolific painter whose work has been featured on over 70 science fiction and fantasy novels, postage stamps, and in National Geographic magazine. He has created hundreds of instructional YouTube videos and classes to inspire a new generation of artists. His accolades are too numerous to mention, and I am honored to have him as a guest on today's podcast. James, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm fine. Thank you, Lindsay, for inviting me. I'm a fan of your podcast and your whole YouTube presence and everything. So it's an honor to be part of your show today.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm just like, gotta play it cool. Look at James Gurney on the show. Don't fangirl too badly. Your career has spanned decades. How has your work changed since you've been active on social media?
Well, I just recently, in fact, another reason I thought of you recently is I joined Substack to kind of do my blogging on there. And I love Substack. It's kind of like the way the internet and social media used to be in like between 2010 and 2015. I'm sure you found that too, because you're also on Substack. And I noticed a lot of people were coming over to my channel from you. So thank you for that.
Oh, that's wonderful. I've been enjoying getting your Substack newsletter. I joined Substack because the previous newsletter I used was closing down, and I thought, well, this will work great, and it's free, and it gives you a place to put all sorts of different things. But I'm mainly using it as a kind of special announcements monthly newsletter, where because I still blog actively, and it does send out an email from there. So I just don't want to overwhelm people. But I've been enjoying your Substacks quite a bit.
I've been dialing it to about 3 posts a week. You know, when I was doing my blog, Gurney Journey, I was doing 7 a week for like 15 years, just about 6,500 posts, which is crazy. Wow. I don't know why I did that, but it was a way for me to download everything I've learned and figured out on my own, and also just to connect with people and bounce ideas off people. But with Substack, I make it 3 a week, so Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. That gives me a little time to think about what I'm going to cover. So I did one today, for example, on how to do live art demos and what to think about while you're doing one, and what people like and don't like about them, because that's a subject that a lot of people have to deal with. I'm sure you've had to deal with it when you do demos online.
Yeah. I read your Substack, and you were talking about painting and talking and describing it at the same time, and it takes me twice as long, I swear, to paint something and talk about it rather than just like painting it on its own. It is quite a skill.
Well, I know. When I do YouTube videos, I do the painting and I shoot the coverage of the painting on location, but I don't do the voiceover while I'm painting.
Oh.
I do that later when I get back to the studio. And sorry, my voice is leaving me here. But I do that later when I go back to the studio, and I try to reconstruct my thoughts as I look at the process. So I really admire people who can talk and demo at the same time.
I think it's probably just what you're used to. I think that's really, you have such a calm way of narrating when you narrate even like things that have been time-lapsed a bit. Because I know you have your watch on your easel, and you can see that as you're painting. So that's nice because it gives people a realistic idea of how long something is taking you, because to see that like 10-minute video, it can feel like, man, you are so fast, and it can feel a little overwhelming. But then you see the watch, you can see how much time's elapsed, and that's really helpful. And your calm demeanor, I think, is very inviting for people. It makes them want to go try it.
I'm glad you mentioned the time lapse, because sometimes time lapse is really useful to compress a really long because let's face it, painting is really fairly boring if you do the whole thing real time. But the time lapse will take a long process and sometimes shorten it up to a faster sequence. But I like to intersperse that with real time work, so people have an idea. It's almost more effective, I think, to have cross dissolves at different stages with real time, because people get a sense of what it looks like when you touch the brush to the surface, and like how fast it really develops. But if you alternate the two and use real live sound underneath the time lapse, I think it's more convincing. Sometimes people put music as a kind of acoustic floor under their time lapse. I think it's better just to use actual natural sounds recorded on location.
Yeah, I agree. I love hearing like the clink of the silverware in the background of your diner videos, or the like the ice boats video that you did. You could hear the ice boats in the background, and it kind of brings you there, uh like you're, I don't know, part of the scene. Or it almost reminds me of like listening to NPR stories where you can hear the natural sound being brought in, so it takes you there, and that's just all audio, but you've got the audio and video together, and it's blended so well. It's almost like
Thank
you
you.
approach every video as a new painting. It's like the video is art as well as the art that you're making is art. It's
Well,
such a
thank you for saying
approach
that.
full
I
of
mean, I
whimsy.
see the video as sort of the art form that any YouTuber does ultimately, even though you're painting in your sketchbook or doing your paintings where whatever. It's the video that most people are going to see. And I love audio. Audio is, I think, the most important thing to get right if for someone who wants to do YouTube videos. And I used to listen to a lot of old radio when I was a kid growing up. I grew up in the 60s, but there was a radio station that played old radio shows from the 50s and the 40s, like Suspense and Lights Out and Escape. And I love those things because for a small budget, you could give the feeling that you're watching a whole big movie. And really, kind of that's what I specialize. For people who don't know my work, I'm sort of specialized as someone who paints realistic pictures of things that don't exist. So you have to use your imagination, but also your observation to bring an imaginary subject to life. And that's kind of what I do, whether it's with painting dinosaurs, either as fantasy, like for Dinotopia, or scientific illustrations. In the last 10 years, I've been doing more gouache painting on location, which is a little different, but it still involves often imagination.
Yeah, and bringing it back to your Substack, what I love, and also on your blog too, how you would show how you would build like little sculptures to get your lighting, and how you would take photos of like in costumes to get your reference images for your fantasy pictures. And I think that's something a lot of people don't realize, and I think it's something a lot of young artists don't know is a possibility. And I find that very informative and fascinating.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that. I based my whole process on the way the Golden Age illustrators like Norman Rockwell and Howard Pyle would work, and also the academic painters of the 19th century. And, you know, growing up in the 60s, I didn't have YouTube or all these resources people have now. So I would go to the library and dig up how-to books to explain how to do art and how to make realistic pictures of things you imagine. Because I was always impressed with art teachers who would talk about doing still lifes or figures or landscapes. But there you're looking at something and trying to transcribe it into a painting. What I wanted to do was a historical scene, like ancient Roman or a clipper ship at sea, where you didn't have any photo you could go from, so you'd have to use your imagination. And like you say, I build little models because my imagination isn't that strong to just dream stuff up from nothing. I have to be looking at something. So if I can make a little cardboard model or a maquette or something out of clay as a kid, and maybe we could talk about kid crafts, because I know you've got a lot of stuff about that on your YouTube channel. There's a lot of stuff that kids can do and that I did as a kid, making stuff out of modeling clay, out of gluing stuff together, model houses out of cardboard. And I think that's a great thing to be working with 3D materials as well as doing stuff as a 2D artist.
What would you recommend as a kind of a toolkit for either parents that want to get their children something to get started in building models, or for painters that want to get to be able to build their own maquette? Is it maquette or marquette?
I say maquette, but you could say model or maquette.
Yeah, or to make their
Maquette
own
is the term
models.
architects use for cardboard miniatures of the buildings they're going to build, to visualize it in 3D. I mean, you can do stuff
Hmm.
on Google SketchUp or something like that, but having an actual physical thing, especially for lighting, lighting is the key
Hmm.
to realism for an imaginary subject. So if you have something in front of you that you can move the light source around in, take it outdoors in real sunlight, you can really see what's going on with the light and shadow. But as far as materials, there's a lot of materials that didn't exist in the days of paper mache and modeling clay and stuff when I was a kid. But stuff like Sculpey, oven hardening clay, it's really great stuff. It's a polymer compound, and you can use that stuff to sculpt, and then you just put it in the toaster oven, and you got something that's you can paint with acrylic. There's also Magic Sculpt, which is a 2-part epoxy material,
Mm-hmm.
and that hardens on its own, even hardens underwater if you need it to. But that is much tougher and harder. Good for a smaller sculpt, but I use that too if I need something that needs to be a little bit more durable. Otherwise, it's just gluing together stuff with a hot glue gun. Another tool that was invented since I was a kid. I would have loved hot glue. As a kid, I did stuff with all kinds of crazy stuff. I did lead casting, lost wax casting. I did metal sculpture. My dad had a whole cutting torch and a welding torch, oxyacetylene. So I made metal sculptures. We had a whole wood shop. So I made kites out of kite sticks that I cut imagine there's a 4th grader pushing spruce on a table saw, and I still got all my fingers. Look at that. I would be nervous having a kid doing all that, but my dad showed me how to be careful with those tools, and I'm glad I learned all that and built stuff. What was it
Was
like
your dad
for you?
An artist? Oh
no, my dad was an inventor and an engineer. He was actually a mechanical engineer, so his idea of drawing was doing diagrams of things from the side view and front view, and he'd work on a drawing table with a parallel bar. So for growing up, there was no one in my family who drew in an artistic sense to draw what you see. Did you grow up around any artists or anyone in your family do art?
Well, my mother is very artistic and crafty. She's an avid quilter and she does toll painting and she's very artistic, but she kind of, I think, feels like she needs permission to do the project or she needs kind of a pattern or an example to go by. And my dad was a home builder. He was a contractor and then he opened up a lumber yard. But luckily or unluckily, I don't know, when I was a kid, I was very clumsy and not very sporty. And they noticed that I loved to draw. So when I was 5, they enrolled me in lessons with a neighbor who was still is, beautiful watercolorist. Her name is Pauline Turner. And I lived right across the cornfield. And so once a week, my parents would send me off to her house and I would get a drawing lesson. And then eventually, that was at age 5. And then at 7, I started watercoloring with her until I was about 13. So I got a really good foundation because she was an old school watercolorist and
Oh, that's great.
definitely, yeah, taught everything by the book. You had to draw before you could touch a paintbrush. And I think having that foundation at such a young age before you could really protest anything was excellent. And then when I started teaching children, I recommend if they want to take a painting class, they had to take the drawing class first. And then I had this kind of like mixed media class that was anything goes. Anybody could, join if they wanted to. But if you were on the track of, no, I want to learn how to draw and then to paint and then, maybe go on when they got older to art school or something, I had that kind of separate track that was a little bit more regimented.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that's great. It's good that you had exposure to all that and someone outside the home that could be a mentor. For me, that was my grandmother, Louise Johnson, who my sister and I would go there and spend a weekend with her. And she would bring out tracing paper and these simple, coloring book images. I remember this one that was like a mind-blowing breakthrough moment. It may not seem like much to other people, but it was a wagon wheel sitting on its sides. It was actually an ellipse on the page. But I saw it as a circle as a kid. And then when I traced it, I realized it wasn't a circle. And I started to realize that when you make something 3D look 2D on a page, you have to transform it somehow. For me, drawing in perspective and vanishing points was really something I couldn't quite figure out until I got to be about 13 or 14. And I started to figure it out. But not having a teacher who could explain that to me made drawing and painting a little less satisfying, even though I did it, at a young age. I went to 3D things just because I couldn't quite crack the code. But once I got to be age 13, I realized, oh, okay, I can draw what I see. I can create a world on a page. And I also, at that age, in 8th grade, I discovered graphic arts, which meant printing and illustration. So we learned to run the presses. We learned to work in the darkroom. And we did a little animation. And that was a really great breakthrough. Just a teacher who let me do my own projects mostly. And I love the chance to do that. Animation is something that fascinates me too.
Was that in public school? You had access to animation?
It was just an animation stand. And then I looked at there was a how-to book by Preston Blair, who was a Disney animator. There really wasn't much available in those days, and you really had to figure it out on your own. But that helped a lot. Also, calligraphy was something I loved, and I know you love calligraphy also. But I had a nice
I like
set
playing
called
with the pens.
Yeah.
I'm
Well,
sorry.
there's all the Tombow ones that they have now they didn't have back then. But we had various kinds of dip pens, and I had an old book from about 1918 called Art, Alphabets, and Lettering. We actually re-released it through Dover. It's a great book from the golden age of ornamental penmanship. And I love that period when everything was hand lettered, not only signs and invitations and things, but also what's called show card writing, which is a mostly forgotten trade for doing point of purchase displays like price tags in stores. It was an art form that hired a lot of artists back then. You can still find old how-to books about show card writing, mostly in gouache, mostly on colored stock, like card stock. And it had to be very rapid, more rapid even than sign painting. And
Oh,
I
wow.
loved all that stuff. I just drank it in as a kid.
Oh, that's really interesting. Um, so, wow, you were doing that at 13. You were doing calligraphy, animation, model building, drawing. That's really something. That's awesome.
My first paying job was was a calligrapher. What I did was I think 14. I did some sample wedding invitations. I got the form for how to write a wedding invitation. Did it with really nice calligraphy, kind of an old English style. And then I went around, rode my bicycle over to print shops. And here's this little kid with a portfolio under his arm. And I said, I can do lettering if anyone comes in and wants a wedding invitation or a menu. Here's my portfolio. And I got some jobs. They paid like $25, which felt like a fortune to me at the time.
Oh,
And
yeah.
um, and I loved it. I loved doing that. And that led to a job doing paste up and advertising design for a small company at age 15, but still before I could drive a car. And
Mm.
so I was running the waxer, waxing the paste up, taking the set type and gluing it down, doing press type. They had press type by then. And that's how you did ads back in those days in the 70s. And it was really quite interesting because getting your name out there was something that you asked about social media and how it's changed our lives as artists. I've been thinking about that lately because it's just, I still can't get used to the idea that anybody can post anything, any picture, any video, and anyone can watch it. And you get served up videos and images that the system thinks you'll like. You can comment, anybody can comment, and anyone can like it, and there's like a popularity contest for images. That whole idea, if you explained that to somebody in the 80s or 70s, they would not have believed it, because the only way you could comment on something was, there's two ways you could comment. You could comment on a call-in show, like a radio show where you call in and talk to the host on that
Mm.
topic, or on letters to the editor on a newspaper or magazine. That was it. I mean, there's no other way a person could be heard. So obviously there's downsides to social media too. But just the ability to get your name out is something that's really a wonderful thing.
I agree. Um, you're very much an artist. Your name comes up all the time when I'm doing these podcasts with other artists, and even when I'm out at a paint out, like on the coast of Maine, painting with random people I've never met before. Like, have you ever seen James Gurney's work? It's just amazing. Why do you think so many artists respond to your work?
I have no idea. I mean, I didn't realize that. I mean, I like to dig into the process of making pictures. You said earlier that my voice is relaxing. I do hear that quite often in YouTube comments, which I think is funny because I tell my wife, if she ever needs to fall asleep, just let me talk to her and she'll go right out, you know.
Aw.
Um, but but I think because I'm self-taught, essentially, I don't have a lot of this stuff, the standard art schools jargon or way of thinking. And I've questioned a lot of the assumptions that people have about how your eye moves through a picture, for example, and tried to dig into some primary research on that topic and found out that there's really a lot that we don't know about how we look at pictures and how we make pictures. And what I really love doing most is just trying to explain things clearly. I'm probably as much a writer as I am a painter. And I've been writing articles for international artists. Maybe some of your followers get that magazine. It's a great magazine. I think I've written something like 88 consecutive articles for that magazine since the late 2007 or so. I'm always working on new articles for them.
I think that's it. I think the fact that you will really dig into things that a lot of people take for granted. You know, we just think, okay, that painting looks nice. I'm going to paint that painting, or this scene is beautiful in front of me. I'm gonna paint this landscape, or you might know a little bit about value and lighting and things, but not really question why is this appealing, and why does this image get so much emotion? Why is this so striking? And that one is very similar, but just kind of meh. I think it's that digging into the nuts and bolts that you do in your blog and your Substack articles and your videos that really keeps the artists in the community coming to your channel to really dig in.
I worked with a scientist who did eye tracking to try to understand how do we look at pictures, because there was all this stuff you'd hear and stuff that was published in old books on composition about how your eye needs to flow in a spiral around the outside edge and tunnel into the middle of a picture, or how you can have lines radiating out that lead your eye to the center of the focal interest of a picture. I thought, well, do our eyes move that way? And actually they don't at all. Turns out that everybody looks at a picture differently, and it depends on a lot of factors, but of what you're looking at. If there's a face in any picture, your eye goes right to the face. We're hardwired to look at faces, it turns out. And that was really clear from the eye tracking. But there's a lot of stuff we still don't know. Like if you were to Google, the eye is most attracted to blank, it'll fill in either bright colors or strong value contrasts, sharp edges. Different teachers have different theories about this, or will speak dogmatically about this, but we really don't know if any of those abstract qualities attracts the eye more than others. And that's the kind of thing I'm really curious about. And I think as we learn more about how the brain works, and if we could combine fMRI scanning, showing in real time how the brain is actually activated, which parts of the brain are activated as you decode a visual image in your mind, combine that with eye tracking data, you'd be able to figure out, by looking at just that data, what someone was thinking when they looked at the picture.
And I think that would be used for nefarious purposes, if like with AI and marketing and all of that, because you can't have nice things. Speaking of AI, how do you think AI is going to affect the world of artists and illustrators, a world that you've been so steeped in for the past several decades?
Well, it's a big thing, obviously, and it's something that I've been thinking about a lot. I know it's a very emotional and controversial subject for a lot of your viewers and any artist, because it is displacing the market, and especially in the digital fields of concept art and animation. It's changing people's workflows. I've played with it a fair amount because I'm being raised in an engineer family. When there's a new tool, you got to play with it and try to break it and try it in different angles. And I haven't found a way to come up with images that I want. I'd rather just draw them. And I've also tried it for writing, and I'm just never satisfied with the results. It just seems too canned or too corny. But I do use it for research. The Perplexity app is really great for research. You can ask it a very complicated text question. It'll give you an answer with sources and links, which is great.
Oh, wow.
I've also used it for upscaling, because we have several books coming out, one of which is a republication of a book that I did with Thomas Kincaid back in the 1982 called The Artist's Guide to Sketching. We have most of the original art, which we've rescanned, but there are a few pieces that were missing. So I thought, how in the world am I going to be able to reconstruct these images from the low-res printed results? And there turns out there are tools that help you fill in missing detail and texture. using AI that's really helpful. So it's on the fringes, it's been interesting and useful to me, but at the core for art making, image making, it's very threatening to people. I do differ a little bit from some of my friends who feel that the art is, or the tools are scraping or stealing from artists. I think in some ways AI art, if it's used, like they were people using my name in prompts a lot early on. I always thought that's cool if they want to do that. It's never going to look like exactly like my work, but it didn't bother me at all. Not because I'm secure or anything like that, but just because I work in traditional media and painting, videos of my painting process. There's no way AI can ever enter that realm. So it doesn't really threaten me directly, but I'm aware that it does threaten the jobs of a lot of people in the business. I don't know, what does that resonate with you at all? Any of those thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I can see it as a powerful tool because, like, we were talking about making little models out of clay and then lighting them and whatnot. It's like, I wonder if, like, if we could think something up, but maybe we just don't have the visual vocabulary to, like, it's like you could say, let's draw a diamond ring, right? You could do an okay diamond ring, but if you wanted to get something that was really realistic with the glistens and the reflections and stuff, you'd want a reference photo. And so you'd need to go hunt down a bunch of reference photos. And so, like, if you were thinking of, I want to draw a painting of a bear eating a blueberry pie wearing a tiara, but you're just trying to think, okay, what does a tiara look like? What does a bear look like? And if you could type that in and get a fairly good reference photo that then you could take, okay, I can see the lighting, I can see the sparkles, I can, something you could work with for proportion or lighting or values, things like that, and then make your own work for it. I could see that being useful. I don't know if it's useful for that or not. And I see people like there was a fellow YouTuber who does the most wonderful, thoroughly researched art reviews. And she had a heart condition and couldn't do the voiceover. And she did it. She used AI somehow to do the voiceover. And I wouldn't have known. And I think for an effect like something like that, where you're giving ability to someone who can't do something, but I don't, has that passion, has that voice, you're giving the voice, like that literally gave the
Yeah.
voice to this friend of mine to be able to create that video. She made the video and did all the work herself, but she typed in the script because she couldn't physically talk for that long anymore. Or people that have disabilities, and it could give them a voice. I think there's so much power and so much positivity that can come from it. But when I think of like people just not hiring an artist because they can just keep typing in prompts until they get something that's good enough for like a spot illustration or a book illustration, that just seems cheesy and wrong. But to elevate people, I think it's good. But just to cut people out of the equation, to cut artists out of the equation, that's where I have negative feelings about it. And honestly, I think that it will be used in that manner by businesses. But as a teacher, I'm not as worried because people are always going to want to make art. People are going to want to get their hands dirty and they're going to want to experience
Yes.
that flow state for themselves.
So
So
true.
as an art, yeah, I'm not feeling threatened by it, but I wouldn't like if my kid said, "Mom, I want to be an illustrator." I'd be like, maybe, maybe you want to try something else or have a backup plan just because it just seems like only the exceptional it's going to be only like the 1% of illustrators that will, it seems, make the cut after AI gets its claws in really deep. Unless AI keeps training itself on other AI images and it just eats itself until it's just a mediocre,
Right. That could happen.
pile of goo. Yeah, that could happen too. Here's hoping.
Well, I
But I mean,
think
I don't like to see. Yeah, go ahead.
I think it really won't hurt the top 10% of the market because leading creatives will use it in ways that we can't even imagine right now. I mean, if you think from the point of view of like 1890, no one could have imagined that animation within 40, 50 years would be at the level of Disney Studios, Snow White, and things like that. And no one could have imagined when photography was invented that it would influence realist painting in a huge way. So people used photography in a variety of different ways. It changed, I mean, Tissot changed Tissot and Degas and their whole approach to composition. So photography itself, which is also a revolutionary idea, was threatening to people, but it also was used in creative ways that we can't anticipate. So there's people at the top of the field who'll be using AI in ways combined with their own skills and sensibilities. But I think where AI is most useful and helpful is the bottom 80%, people who maybe don't consider themselves artists, but like living in a fantasy world or living in someone's IP. It might be a way that they can be empowered to create things that are really quite interesting and worthy. So I wouldn't put down people who use AI as being not artists. I think it helps a lot of people. The only problem is there's so much of it created, so much of it filling all the contests and all the art review sites and portfolio sites that it's hard to even navigate. If you do traditional like digital art and you want to get your work seen, who's going to look at it when they have to be buried under just huge amounts of AI? So I don't know, maybe there's a sorting algorithm that can help us with that, but that is a problem right now. Is just for contests and competitions, it really presents a real challenge because it's so good at imitating the look of traditional artists. But what you said is really true. This will lead to if anything, kind of a backlash toward the handmade, which is good for you and me, I think. Just like the Industrial Revolution led to the whole Art Nouveau movement and William Morris and all he did with wallpaper and handmade crafts. That was really a response to the machine-made Industrial Revolution. So I think we'll see this is sort of a cognitive revolution of people who will be using their hands, looking for authenticity, looking for direct connection with the real world. And for that matter, I think sketching from life is the ultimate way to live in a kind of a heightened state. And there's no way any machine could be part of that. It's just so powerful.
I agree. Speaking of sketching for life, I have to ask you about your journey that you took with Thomas Kinkade on a train to write your book. I mean, that must have been terrifying. Did you just like hop a boxcar like a hobo and off you went? Or you gotta tell us about that. Like, what was that like?
Yeah, well, we were two penniless art students at Art Center College of Design. I had a girlfriend at the time who is now my wife, but she was just a sketching buddy, Jeanette Lendino. And Tom and I just said to our friends and our teachers, we said, we're just going to take the summer off and we're going to ride the freights across America. We had met this hobo named Bud at the LA freight yards. And we asked him, how do you ride freight trains? And he said, well, you wait till they're leaving at yard speed and you throw your backpack onto an empty box car. And so we did. We got our backpack full of markers and sketchbooks. And we mixed this kind of food we thought would be a universal food, mixing peanut butter and honey together. That was a bad idea because it turned solid, and it's solid like cement, like mass. But we had a great time because, we were broke. We didn't have any money, and we would make a little bit of income by sketching portraits in bars. So for $2, you could get your portrait sketched by Jim or Tom, and sometimes they'd pay us in beer, which was a problem because, after a while, the likenesses went downhill. We got to Oklahoma, and this one guy with this long, low kind of brimmed hat said, enough of these funny cartoons. Draw me like you see me, he said. And we got talking to him as we drew his portrait. He was leading a movement for Oklahoma to secede from the Union, which I thought would have been funny. But we slept in graveyards, on rooftops, and we interviewed gravestone cutters and loggers and ex-cons, and it was really an amazing chance just to see America. And our impression was that people were really generous to us and kind to us. These two kind of grimy hobos with matching shirts that said Jim and Tom, and we had short haircuts. And we ended up in New York with this idea, why don't we write a book about sketching, about our adventures? So we did. And that was our first book. It came out in 1982. And that's what we're republishing this next coming year. And
when will that be? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, it should be out probably in 2025. There's also going to be. I was just going to say there's going to be a documentary about Tom that was done called what's it called? The People's Artist, or Art for the People, Art for Everybody. And it's kind of about Tom's rise and fall, but it really starts after he goes north to Northern California, leaves art school. And this is after my whole period of doing the artist guide, working as an animation background painter with him. We were good buddies going back all the way to when we were both students at UC Berkeley, because I was a major in anthropology before I went on to art school. And that's where I met Tom. And he was at the time I knew him, he was kind of a wild prankster and a real character, a real jokey kind of fun guy to be around. And it was only later that he had his big print success and the painter of light. His style changed quite a lot from the days I was working with him to painting the cottages and stuff. And then, of course, he died in 2012. But I didn't know him that closely, so I'm not part of this documentary. But I wanted to tell my own story in republishing the book.
Oh, that's great. I'm looking forward to that because I could never get my hands on an original copy of that book. And luckily, you shared so much on the blog that we can all look back at the Wayback Machine and access that and access your Substack and whatnot. So you start. My daughter's an anthropology. One of my daughters is an anthropology major, so I think that's kind of awesome. So did you complete your degree, or did you just decide hop in the rails and then just that was your launching point and you just never went back? Or how did your education relate to your art career or not relate to your art career?
Well, luckily, I'm the youngest of 5 kids, so my parents didn't worry, and I was a good student, so my parents didn't worry too much about me. But I graduated UC Berkeley as a undergraduate liberal arts student, and I loved archaeology and physical anthropology, so I finished there, and then I went on to art school. I dropped out of art school and never went back because I realized that not all the teachers knew that much. Some of them did, but a lot of them were just boring classes where they didn't know what they were doing. So I just borrowed my wife's notes because she went all the way through the whole program. And there were some good classes she took. So I took those notes and wrote them down, went to old art instruction books to get other stuff, and just picked up what I could from where I could. But after we finished up in New York, Tom and I spent working on the book. That kept us pretty busy. And then we also worked as background painters for an animated film that was done by Ralph Bakshi called Fire and Ice. So we had to paint a lot. I really wasn't painting much at all before then, but I had to paint about 600 paintings in a period of a year and a half. Ended up being about 11 paintings a week. And it was a lot of work. But that's where I learned to paint, was just doing it.
Was that gouache and for like animation cells, or was it like large set paintings, or?
It was small background paintings. They're about 9 by 12 inches on average, some a little bigger. And we used cartoon color, which is the same kind of paint they use on animation cells. It's very opaque. It's very flat. And it's also really hard on brushes. We'd order Winsor Newton Series 7 brushes, and they'd only last like 2 weeks. They're really expensive brushes, and we'd kill them.
Yeah.
And we also used airbrushes and killed the airbrushes too, actually. But working in an animation studio was a lot of fun because you get this collaborative sort of energy of all these people working together, all the animators at their tables. And Tom and I had just art books stacked up on all the side tables and always some kind of discussion about who was better, Constable or Turner, things like that. And what we tried to do, because the movie was art directed by Frank Frazetta, who's known for his barbarian artwork, but he didn't really do very worked out backgrounds. So we had to borrow from various landscape painting traditions to try to get a background look that would work for his style. But we had a lot of freedom. Ralph actually was a great director for giving us freedom and giving us a chance to kind of figure it out on our own. And later I got an offer to work for Disney as one of their layout guys, but I decided I'd rather go freelance. Just like you, I just wanted to do it on my own.
Yeah, it's got pros and cons. The collaborative effort you mentioned is probably the biggest con I would find working freelancing on your own, if you don't have a project that you're working on with other people. You know, like you had your animation team, you and Tom and other people you would paint with, to kind of bounce ideas off of and just have that camaraderie that I guess now we can find online that, you
Did you
don't
ever work in
necessarily
a
have.
studio? Did you ever work in a group studio?
No, no, I had a teaching studio where I would have other instructors come in and do some classes for me, but I never worked in a collaborative way, artistically, like visually art wise. I actually come from radio, so you did have
Oh,
to work in large groups in like radio and television and stuff. So, uh, in that vein of my career, I worked with other people, but for the art stuff, it's all been pretty much either teaching which you'd have a group of people, learning from you. But other than that, it's been pretty much solo.
can I tell a story from working in the studio? This is the
Yeah.
advertising studio Sun and Sun Graphics in Mountain View. Um, I was doing this ad, a big double page spread ad for one of their big clients named Hal's Music. And I had this idea, why don't I do a big rabbit, like a Hal's rabbit? We'll call him Hal. It's sort of based on R. Crumb and Walt Disney and whatnot. So he's holding a big bass guitar. I wanted him to be the mascot for this music company. And the owner of the company, the small advertising studio, Dave, his name was, he would always badmouth his clients after he got off the phone with them. So Hal had called and said, "When's that ad going to be done?" "It'll be done real soon. We just got the kid working on it now. He's doing the Hal Rabbit." Okay. And so he was very subservient. And then when he hung up, he said, "That effing," he was just swearing up and down and calling him all kinds of names. And so I had to finish it up because he had to deliver it later that day. And he came over to me and he said, "How you doing on that?" He was like tapping his foot and ashing a cigarette on my head and stuff. I said, "I'm almost done. I just have to ink in this whole background." And he said, "Okay, write this in, F Hal." So the F word, Hal, on the background. I said, "I can't write that. You write that." So he got a brush and ink and he carefully lettered Fuck, Hal. I said, now what? That's going to show up. He said, no, when you ink over it, it'll disappear. So I got a big brush and I inked over it. And unfortunately, he only had like 20 minutes left to deliver it. It surfaced again, really obviously. So he said, "Put another coat on it real quick." So I put another coat on it. It surfaced again. And he had to go out and deliver this job, which said F his client. But I guess we didn't get as many ads from Hal after that. But they did like the rabbit, I heard.
I can imagine. Oh, that's funny. Oh, I think that's the best art story I've heard so far from any guests on the podcast. Um, I want to circle back to the your background in archaeology and anthropology, Dinotopia, and then the thing I find the most fascinating because I love postage stamps. You've designed postage stamps, and I'm curious about the process. How big are those paintings to begin with, and what's the process of working with like the postal system? Do they call you up and say, "Hey, I got a job for you. You want to do some postage stamps," or is it a competition? You have to compete to do them. I'm curious. How does that all go?
Yeah. Well, it's an art director, a group of art directors who work with the Citizen Stamp Advisory Committee. The committee comes up with a topic, hands it off to one of the art directors, and then they call an artist they want to work with. And because I had done Dinotopia, which is a series of books about a mythical island of people and dinosaurs, they wanted me to do this one of a scene with dinosaurs as part of a larger scene, so you could tear out the stamps from a larger background landscape. We originally started with the idea of doing 4 stamps in the scene, but I kind of did so many sketches for them of a larger, really 2 scenes: a Cretaceous scene, which is more recent, and a Jurassic scene, which has the Stegosaurus and the Brachiosaurus and the Diplodocus and all that. And so I did these 2 scenes, and they had to be, you asked how big they were. They don't want you to work too big because if you do, people tend to put in too much detail and it gets lost when you shrink them way down to the size of a stamp. So the whole scene, which was 15 stamps, was just 24 inches wide. And the reason it was that size is it had to fit on a drum scanner. In those days, they had these specialized scanners. And this is 1997. I think they had the very first digital manipulator for images back then too,
Hmm.
at the National Geographic. They borrowed theirs. This is, I think they called it SciTech at the time. What they needed to do is move one of the heads of the dinosaurs over a little bit. So they scanned it, moved it over. I was just amazed you could do this digitally. But painting is in oil. It was reproduced something like 182 million times or something. And
Wow.
doesn't pay that much, but it's really a great honor to be part of that. And we had to make sure everything was right too, because I didn't want to get a bunch of letters. They had gotten letters before for another dinosaur stamp because they called an Apatosaurus a Brontosaurus, and that got a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people writing letters. So normally they have a researcher who gives you a file folder full of research stuff to use. But I said, look, I have relationships with botanical paleobotanists, with all the different dinosaurs, the insect scientists, and all the different elements of the scene. If I can just reduce this to 5 experts, I'll document the file for you and give you the file. So if you get any letters, you'll know who wrote in or what the answers are. But they said, well, this is the first time we've ever let any artist do it directly. And I'm really glad they did, because I didn't want to have to go through all the red tape of going back and forth with their experts. So it worked out really well. And they sent me out to Grand Junction, Colorado with my son, who was just like about 8 or 9 at the time, for the release of the stamps. And they make a big deal of it when they release stamps. So I learned a little bit about the whole philatelic world and just the incredible obsession people have about stamps.
Mm. Now there's also an Australian version of your stamps too, isn't there? Did I
Yes.
see those other countries that have also used your artwork for stamps, or that you've done commissions for?
Yeah, that was in 2012. Australia's Age of Dinosaurs, it was called. And it was fewer stamps, I think just 5. Starting at the left of the panorama was a Coolosuchus, which is like a very early kind of attack feeder, more like a salamander than anything, going all the way through to some of the feathered dinosaurs and the more recent ones on the right. But in that one, both the dinosaurs and the other creatures had to be right for that period. And the plants that were associated with them had to be right too. So we had to, again, work with experts. I flew to Australia along with Tom Rich, who was a scientist in the Museum of Victoria, to research that. And we would go look at fossils in the museum and kind of go from there. We also went out to the bush to see some of the wildlife that would remind us of what we wanted to get into the scene. So I got to hear a lyrebird doing its mating call. Lyrebirds are these amazing birds in Australia, which can mimic any kind of sound effect, like the sound of a camera shutter or a
Oh,
motorcycle
wow.
or things like that. So they're really magical. And at one point we were driving along with another paleo artist and a scientist, and there was a dead wombat on the side of the road. And they said, stop, we got it. Because one thing about paleontologists you have to know is they love looking at dead animals. So they walked over and they looked at it. This thing was really bloated from the heat. And I was going to kick it with my foot. And they said, don't do that. It'll explode. They said from
Oh,
experience. and,
oh
and,
no.
and so we looked at this dead wombat for a while. Scientists love this kind of thing. They love how things look after they die, because that's really what they look at when they're going through and studying a fossil.
Hmm. When it was dinosaur times, were all the continents connected? Was it like Pangea at that time, or was it Australia still separated from the rest of the landmass?
Early
Kind of
on, Pangea.
remembering my
No, you
science.
got it right. You got it right. No, early on, even before the time of dinosaurs, it was one big supercontinent, and it broke up. So South America split off from Africa, and North America split away. But the thing about North America is that there was a sea going right down the middle of it. And so Kansas, what's now Kansas, and the Mississippi River Basin was covered with water. So you really had an eastern and a western landmass. And but there are still a lot of very big-bodied dinosaurs in North America at the time. This would be all the way to the time that the asteroid hit in 66 million years ago. So it's the landscapes kept changing, and that really affected the fates of all these dinosaurs. And for Dinotopia, I wanted to lock in a period of time when there still were land masses crowded together before they broke up. So I have a globe in Waterfall City that shows the world at like 120 million years ago. And there's a lot of little Easter eggs like that in the Dinotopia books. Dinotopia, for those who don't know it, is a illustrated book series. First one came out in 92, and it was really a picture book for older readers, so for teenagers and adults. And it's a fully illustrated 160-page book, so it's a lot of pictures. And I had to tell all my illustration clients, I'm working on this big project. I hope it'll work out. At the time, dinosaurs weren't popular, but I was lucky that Jurassic Park came out right after Dinotopia, and that sort of raised the whole sea level for dinosaur science and dinosaur art.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. It was funny when I was telling my husband that I was interviewing you. He's a big dinosaur fan. He's like, "Oh, Dinotopia! I know Dinotopia." So he was very excited as well.
We have another
Um,
book coming out. I actually have 3 books coming out. A
yeah.
book called Life Lessons from Dinosaurs, and it's all the art from 4 Dinotopia books, combined with sayings or kind of witticisms, or like, if you have a small brain, make sure you have a big heart, and if all else fails, improvise. Or another one is, reality is for people who can't handle fantasy. And
Mhm.
and so these are all various things. You're not old, you're just highly evolved. So little inspirational sayings combined with the artwork in a small gift book. The third book we're working on right now is a book called Gouache in the Wild, which is a follow-up to Color and Light and Imaginative Realism, my 2 books for Andrews McMeel Publishers. And this is going to be a big one about painting in opaque water media, which I know is something you love, and you've interviewed people who are gouache painters. And I love gouache and painting in opaque, combining it with watercolor and getting into that opaque range. Also using casine, which is an antique painting medium that has been popularized recently, that uses milk
By
as a
you.
binder. Well, not just me, but a lot of people. It's a neat medium because it was a predecessor to acrylic. Before they really developed acrylic in the 30s and 40s, there were a lot of illustrators using casine. It's the oldest paint known to humankind because there's casine fragments that are found on an abalone shell in Africa that go back 50,000 years, way older than oil or any other medium. So what kind of milk were they using? I don't know, because that's before the domesticated animal. So it might be human milk for all I know. But it's milk makes a good gluey sort of binder for paint. And it's still really good. They add, it has a strange smell though, so people should try this out. What I recommend if you're trying a new medium is get a black tube and a white tube and do some grisaille paintings and see if you just like the feel of the paint. If you like the smell of it, the feel of it, the way it cleans up. I took to gouache right away. I got, I think, maybe 10 tubes, and I added a few more. They don't have a huge number. It's only made by 1 company.
What do you mean the casing only is made by one company, or
Yes.
you only buy gouache from one company?
Oh, casine is made just by the Richardson Company or
Yep.
Shiva. They bought the
Hmm.
Shiva company. And so it almost was, I went up to the maker of this paint at the Plein Air Convention, and I said, wow, you still make casine? I remember using that stuff in the 60s. And he said, yeah. He says, it's just a niche product. We don't sell very many of them. I said, well, maybe it could be more popular. He says, I don't want it to be too popular because I don't want the big ones like Winsor Newton and Holbein to get in on it. So I don't know.
Hmm.
So far, it's still just Richardson that makes it. And they're a good company and good people making it. I wanted to ask you, Lindsay, have you ever been to any art material factories or places where they make paints or brushes or paper or
No,
anything
I
like that?
haven't. I would love to though. I'd love to. I used to love watching well, you can find them online now, but I remember when I was a little kid, and I think it was Mr. Rogers or Sesame Street, and they would show like how a crayon was made, and they would have all the pigments going together with the wax, and then they would mix the thing would mix it up, and they'd pour it through the molds, and there's something chopping it and then wrapping it with a wrapper with the I used to love seeing that stuff, but I've never been into a paper. I'd love to go to like a watercolor paper factory and see how they make the watercolor paper. Because I've made handmade paper and I've tried to make watercolor paper, and it is not it is not ready for prime time. It is, just sizing is weird and textures too all over the place. But I'd love to get the chance to go check something like that out.
Yeah, I've had invitations to go down to the speedball company and see how they make all the lino cut stuff and some of the paints they make and stuff like that, and the dip pens.
Oh, cool.
But I really haven't had a chance to do that yet. You probably get sent a lot of material and from all over the place.
Yeah.
What do you say when someone offers to send you something? Because you don't want
to. It depends. Usually, probably about 90% of the time I say no thank you, just because a lot of the things that companies offer to send me it's the same exact thing with just a different label on it that I've tried several times before because of the amount of white labeling that goes on. So you probably get hit up by more reputable companies, but I get hit up by a lot of non-reputable companies, and it's just kind of like, oh, I'm pretty sure I know what that is. And they're not reaching out to you because they like my work. They're reaching out to me because they just want it promoted. But if it's something really unusual, really unique, something that hasn't been done before, something that's innovative, I would say yes, and I would try it. And then if I try it on a video, I would just be sure to say that this was sent to me for free, so that nobody is thinking that I'm spending, especially if it's an expensive thing. I don't want somebody to think that, well, Lindsay spent that kind of money on it. It must be a perfectly reasonable thing to go buy, because I may not have spent my money on it. If I tried it and it's okay, okay doesn't mean go spend your money on it. I think it'd have to be pretty exceptional. But as long as people are fully aware that if I do review it, it's going to be a unbiased, truthful review, and they still want to send it anyway, then that's fine. But mostly I turn down offers for product unless it's something that I've had several people, I have to have over 12 people on their own ask for it for me to say yes to take it in. I know it's kind of arbitrary, but it just it helps stem the tide a bit of the supplies coming in, because at a certain point it's just the same thing with a different label on it over and over and over again, and that mass consumption, I don't want to promote that mass consumption. But I also love to try stuff, so I don't know how effective I am at not promoting the mass consumption, because it's fun to try new things, and I do have quite a collection, because I have a hard time parting with some things if I've tried them and I like them. So that's why I teach, I think, in-person classes at the library, so I can use it up and I can spread the bounty a bit.
Give it out. Yeah, put it out on all the
tables.
tables.
Use it up and give it out.
No, I really
it's so nice because if you
I respect
see a kid that doesn't have any. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I just want to say I respect your integrity on how you deal with that, and we probably both get sent stuff or offered to send stuff, and I have the same reaction you do. I like trying new things out, but if there's no chance I'm going to use something, I don't want them to send them to me. Sometimes I do what you were suggesting, where I bring materials along with me if I'm painting outdoors. If I'm painting in a neighborhood where the kids aren't likely to have supplies, I hand them out to kids. But I do have a form letter I send back to companies that say, if you want to send me something, that's fine. I don't take money for I don't do official reviews exactly. But if I try something out, I may be honest, I may not like it. Chances are, if I don't like something, I won't talk about it at all. But I don't want to give anyone the impression that I'm being paid to do something. And I agree with you that you have to be really open with your followers and viewers about under what conditions you're using this stuff. Did you buy it? Did you get given it? So I try to be open with people on that.
It's really important, because there's so many people that are not. And the proliferation of haul videos that have sprung up on YouTube, and I can see why they do very well. And a new channel can come out and start by putting a haul video out and just shopping and showing what they bought. In the art realm, it's not like just clothing or makeup realm, it's like in the art realm, every video on their channel is unboxing new products, and they're not doing anything to show how to use them or to inspire how to use them because it gets a lot of views. And on one hand, I can't blame them. I mean, they're hashtag winning YouTube, but on the other hand, it makes all of this excess seem normal, and it's not normal. And I don't like people feeling bad about what they have because they don't have beautiful, sparkling, huge rooms filled with unused art supplies everywhere. It just feels kind of gross, you know.
Yeah, I
So
agree
that
with
also
you.
helps me not want to take on too much of that.
And
But
if you really
yeah,
want to do a
Right.
review of a review of paints, whether you're doing it for yourself or for someone doing it for their channel, you really one good way to do is a light fastness test where you paint up swatches of all the different colors, cut them in half, and put one half of all those swatches in a bright sunlit south facing window, and then the other one under cover in a cool dry place, and then just compare them. It's amazing how some things like highlighter markers are really go crazy with changing color. And before you want to use something in an actual painting, especially if it's going to be hung out in light, it's good to test them out and see what happens with them.
I agree. I had purchased some not Holbein, it was Shinhan gouache, and I got the set of 12 because the colors were so rich and vibrant, and it was a really great mixing set. And it was the smallest set they had, and I wanted to buy something smaller because I had tested the Holbein mixing set of 5, and I loved that. And I find that I enjoy working with a limited palette more than an extended palette. And then if someone wants to try it, at least they can try it without spending too much money. Anyway, I didn't read the pigment information before I purchased it. And so when I got it, there were a few pigments that seemed a little dodgy to me. And so I'm like, oh, but I love the paint. And it's like, I really want to use this. And I don't want to just have it in a sketchbook if want to do a bigger painting with it or something to frame. And so I did a light fast test. And I generally don't do too many light fast tests because being so far north, I don't know how accurate they would be. But I really wanted to use this paint. So I did that. As you said, I did the swatches, covered up half and put half in a bright sunny window for a couple months. And the only color that faded was not what I expected would fade. I expected
Huh.
one of the reds and yellows to fade because they had some iffy pigments, but it was a purple it said it used PV14, which should be a fairly stable
Yeah.
violet color. It's one of the few stable violet colors. That sucker faded like you wouldn't believe, but the couple other ones that I thought were going to be for sure fading were absolutely fine, no change whatsoever. So
Huh.
it's definitely informative and interesting to do. I just don't trust my results being way up here in Maine, not having as close to the equator sun that like they do where they light fast test paints for legit like in Arizona and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And I actually did a fade test on the Shinhan set too, because they sent me one of those. And I wanted to try it out.
Oh,
And it was one cool red that just really shifted a lot. But most of them, I was
which one
surprised how
was it?
stable. I
Yeah,
forget the pigment. I'm funny
yeah.
with paints because I will reach into my kit and often pull out almost at random a yellow, a blue, and a red, or some set of 3 colors, even if they don't even go together, and different brands, watercolor and gouache, mix them all, and I'll just take 3 or 4 or at most 5 paints on location and see what I can do with them. And I like the limitations that does. I did a whole video called Triads where I talk about 3 colors plus white being a starting point for a lot of color schemes. Because with color, I find that it's when you start leaving colors out that color schemes get interesting. And if you look at, you can actually map or chart the colors in a given color scheme digitally. There's programs that'll do this, that'll make a three-dimensional blob of the color in 3D color space. And if it's narrowly pushed in one direction or another, especially if you're color scripting a movie or like an animated film, um, it's much more satisfying than using all the colors. If you have all the colors available, the temptation for a lot of beginning artists is to have a nice bright green and a bright orange and bright yellow, bright red. And Andrew Loomis, who was a great colorist and teacher, wrote some books that are published again. He called this the fruit salad disease. And
Wow.
I know what he means. So I try to watch out for that by just limiting it to 3 colors. And I often mix different brands to make it clear to the viewer that this is not being sponsored by any individual brand. It's just whatever I happen to have with me that day.
Yeah, I think the important thing is that you have a range of values. So as long as you can get a rich dark, either mix a black or have a black if you prefer, and have a white, and then you can get that whole gamut. It doesn't really matter if the banana's yellow or it's green or it's brown. As long as you can get some, you can hit all those values in your painting, it's going to work, I think.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. In fact, you can do a painting with yellow ochre, raw sienna, black, and white, and use the
Mm.
black for your cools, and make the colors seem warm and cool with the black and white making the bluish colors, and it's you can get really neat effects that way. So the less is more with colors. Also, if you're carrying stuff around in a bus station or a restaurant or sketching in a place like that or a concert where you can't really have a whole set of paints
Hmm.
out, just having black and white and one other color is often a good idea.
I remember playing around with the Zorn palette a bit, and I don't know if the black that he used was a little bit cooler than what I had available to me, but I loved how he almost used the black as a blue, and was like, what was it, black, cadmium red, cadmium yellow, and white? I'm thinking in a Zorn palette, or was there ultramarine blue, or does it just depend on who you ask about that?
Yeah, I think the classic Zoran palette would be black, white, yellow ochre, and then a vermilion red. People don't use
Mm.
vermilion much anymore because it's toxic, but the basic idea is just to do black, white, and a dull yellow and a red. And of course, people know this, I think, and you know this, that Zoran did use other colors, and there were a lot of other colors found in his studio. He used blues and greens for a lot of his paintings, but he did do a self-portrait where he showed the palette that he's used, and it's a very, very limited palette. So he's been associated with that Zoran palette, and it's a very
Mm.
good teaching device for trying to get the most out of a limited range. I often like having a ultramarine blue or a viridian green for mixing skin tones, but I don't like to have. I don't have any preset palettes. Some artists say I need these 18 colors every time,
Mm.
but I like having a different set each time just to throw myself into a little off balance.
Yeah, I'm a bit of a watercolor travel palette collector, so I've got a whole bookshelf that's just full of like interesting little travel palettes, either ones that I've found to purchase or ones that I've made myself. And I'll just grab one if I'm going out to the beach or something. I'll just grab one, grab a sketchbook, and hit the road, and then it'll be like, oh, what delightful colors will I found in this palette, and then just make it work. Because I find the
Yeah, and for
more the
people who
more
like
I bring, the less I do.
the people who like to work from a watercolor set of pan colors, you can get an empty metal case and
Mhm.
then empty half pans or full pans and put together your own set of like 12 or 8 or 12 colors. And that's all you need. I think a lot of great painters, only use 6 or 7 colors. But if you just make it, you go up to 10. I like having a larger full pan for colors I use a lot, like ultramarine blue or
Yep.
yellow ochre in watercolor. And that's all you need. I mean, it's a small thing that almost fits in your pocket. But
Hmm.
I think you were going to ask about the palette I use for painting a lot. It's a flat metal palette. It's just something I found in a stationery store I think in Montreal. It's just a little pencil box, basically. And then I sanded it
Hmm.
and spray painted it with white enamel. You can use gray too, but I like white because then you can really see the transparent mixtures. But the problem with a
Hmm.
gray palette is it's harder to tell if you're painting on white paper what you got going on with the mixtures, the transparent mixtures.
It looks great in your videos, or do you have a different one that you use for gouache and casine?
I have used a gray palette a few times, and for casine, it's such an opaque paint that you can use a gray palette and gray paper and really get great results with it.
Uh, I love your sketch easel builder group on Facebook. What inspired you to start that? Is it because you love gadgeting up the plein air setups, uh, or do you just have one set up and you stick with it? Because
This is a
that's a weird question, a
yeah
weird way
no
to phrase
no
that question. I'm sorry.
if people go to Facebook, Facebook is maybe not the greatest platform for a lot of things, but it's great for one thing, and that's groups. And the one group that I started two groups. One's called Color and Practice, and the other is called Sketch Easel Builders. But it's really run by a couple of really smart women. One of them's named Wendy Weldon. And if you do want to check it out and you want to join, just make sure you answer the questions first, because they have to let you in the right way. But it's a real community of people who are sharing ideas, and it's a open source. We looked into having this easel that I came up with manufactured, but it was so expensive, and I just figured it's better to let people improve on the design, come up with their own variations, share ideas, and then nobody owns it. And I like it that way. And people have the greatest ideas, like for magnets on the bottom of your water cup that line up with magnets. Mm-hmm. These are neodymium, the little tiny powerful ones that you embed into the surface of your wood palette, so that your water cup stays there, it doesn't fall off. And if you have a metal mixing surface, like that palette we were talking about earlier, that also mm-hmm. holds on to the bottom half of the sketch easel. So it's two sections. This top section is for holding the sketchbook or panel, and the bottom section is for holding all your paints. It's important, I think, when you're painting from life, to have what you're painting as close to your line of sight as possible, so that mm-hmm. when you're standing or sitting, it's right next to what it is you're looking at. Because if you have to turn way over to the side or down, it's much harder to make the accurate judgments. And mm-hmm. it's also good, I think, to have the mixing surface close to the painting surface, so that when you're mixing your color, you don't have to reach too far away. That's one of the problems with French easels, is you have to reach down to do the mixtures and then up to the easel. Another problem with French easels is that the legs tend to fold up. I was painting on the edge of the Grand Canyon one time, and I had the back leg is a folding leg, and I didn't notice that it was set up with the folding leg kind of partially sprung. Mm-hmm. So it was just about to go, and I was painting away, did this really nice painting, and the whole thing started to kick forward over the edge. I grabbed it at the last second. Only a few brushes went off. And
oh, wow.
And the thing about sketch easels is that they're designed to fit on camera tripods, so they're more stable, and they don't have a whole lot of wind surface, so the wind won't blow them down. And it's a really lightweight design, but people are always improving on it. They've improved it way beyond what I had originally, with a lot of variations, some designed to go on bicycles or motorcycles, or some designed to go in indoor places. I've actually used my mm-hmm. sketch easel in a supermarket next to the Apple section. I set it up in a shopping cart, and I wore a uniform shirt, and I just got to business, started painting this, because there was this really great scene of these lemons and apples and stuff, and under this mirror with a kind of condensate. I just loved the way it looked. So I started mm-hmm. painting it, and I thought, someone's going to stop me and ask me what I'm doing. But nobody came up to me the whole time. I was painting for 45 minutes. No one said a word to me because I looked official. And then this guy later told me, he said, there's a reason nobody bothered you, because you're wearing a uniform, because all these suppliers and restockers go into supermarkets to restock the shelves. And if you're wearing a uniform, nobody will question what you're doing. You can do anything in a supermarket.
Wow.
You could jump around a pogo stick or something, you'd be fine.
You didn't have to ask permission from the grocery store? You just did it?
I figured they'd say no if I asked, so I just did it, and didn't have any problem.
Oh, nice. Did you take a photo as a safety just in case you got kicked out?
Yeah, my wife was shopping, so she finished shopping in 45 minutes, so we had to go anyway. But it took about 45, and she took a picture of me painting away there. And I had a line already. I was going to say, well, I'm from Hannaford, and we have our art of food shopping. I'm part of that new campaign, Haven't you heard about it? I was hoping they'd let me loose, but nobody bothered me. I've painted in diners. I've painted in operas. I've painted in concerts. Concerts are tough because unless you sit right close to the stage, you don't get much light on your work.
Yeah.
But one thing that comes up a lot is with artists who want to paint outdoors is, what if someone catches you looking at them? You know, like if you're doing a portrait of somebody. And what I do if someone looks up while I'm doing their portrait is I just show it to them and just say, "Hey, I'm an art student. I'm learning to draw heads. Do you mind if you can stay as long as you want or go or whatever. You don't need to
Mhm.
pose." And because I tried the idea of wearing reflective sunglasses and being mysterious about it, but that doesn't work as well. People are really cool.
Yeah,
They
you
just
might.
want a
Yeah.
photo to put on their social media, really.
Okay, I have one last question for you. And this is if you could take one of your past projects, whether it be a novel cover, a book you wrote, or even a video you produced for YouTube, and redo it, which one would it be and why?
Wow. Well, and it's funny because there are some paintings I did for Dinotopia of dinosaurs before they realized they had feathers. And I've thought about, should I go back in and paint feathers on those dinosaurs? But I decided not to because I don't want to do like George Lucas did to Star Wars movies where he went and tried to fix them with new techniques. So I left all my early stuff, whether it's perfect or not, or up to science or not, just where it is as a snapshot in time. Probably, I mean, we all have a learning curve, and I've learned in doing videos, it's probably best to start out as late as possible. That's where people set me straight. Like I did one video of painting in the graveyard where I was really into all these Lego powered dollies, and I had all these camera moves that were really smooth and subtle. Walking into the graveyard, you know, and the camera's moving between the gravestones, and setting down my backpack, and the camera moves in. And anyway, this went on for like 10 minutes of all these setup shots. And someone just said in the comments, there's too much of an establishing shot. Just start out the video sooner. And I really took that to heart, to try to, if I had it to do again, I would just start right out with, here's where I am. Here's what I'm painting. Here's what I'm trying to accomplish. I think even an art video should tell a story, meaning you introduce yourself as a character, who you are, what you're trying to do, what you want to accomplish, and then what's going wrong at every stage, what's blocking you. That's a formula that works for anything, for a movie, for an animated film, and for a story. And it also works for telling the story of making a picture, because every picture is kind of a miracle. And there's always a better way to tell the story. Usually it means starting as late in the process as possible.
And it seems like that curiosity keeps you painting every day. You never seem to be art blocked. Whenever I can always for sure turn on YouTube or Instagram or open up my email and see something new that you've created and find some new interesting inspiration.
I've never really suffered from too much creative block, I must say. I just figure I'll just start out and I can always fix it, so I might as well begin. Part of that comes from doing all the background paintings for the movie, where we had to do so many paintings over such a short period of time that we did screw up a couple, but not many, because we just had to make it work. With opaque paints,
Mhm.
that's the nice thing about opaques, is you can change things and fix them, and make it, if something isn't working out, you can always paint over it and fix it. So I don't fear launching into something. Um, I don't know. I know some people do, and I sympathize with that, but I just try to launch in and fix it as I go.
Just like Nike says, just do it. Just jump in.
Yeah, I mean, after
Well,
all, there's no risk is involved in making a painting. Not like climbing, free climbing El Capitan or doing hang gliding or something. You can't really hurt yourself, so why not take a chance?
absolutely. And I think that's a wonderful sentiment to end this podcast on today. James, thank you so much for spending so much of your time with us this afternoon. And I would love to talk to you again sometime in the future if you have room in your schedule, but I know you have things to do. So thank you on behalf of my entire audience for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Lindsay. And I'm sure I speak for a lot of people when I say thank you for generously sharing so much of your enthusiasm and knowledge and curiosity, and for putting out so much content that really is inspiring to people, and where you just try stuff out and you're sort of a front person for everybody else to get your feet wet and try things out. And I think it's a great thing that you share all that.
Oh, thank you so much. And thank you, folks at home, for listening, whether you're watching it on YouTube and enjoying the video or you're listening in your favorite podcast player. If you know anybody that would like to listen to this conversation, please share this podcast with them. I will have links to everywhere you can find James Gurney in the show notes or video description, depending on where you are watching or listening to this. And you can check out everything that we've talked about in the podcast today. Thank you so much for joining us. And till next time, happy
Okay.
crafting. Bye.
Bye. Thanks a lot.